You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob, it's
Welcome back to Inside the Village across the Village Media Network, and of course available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Michael Friscolanti is here as always, editor-in-chief of Village Media. Derek Turner, executive producer. All right, things are heating up. We'll talk elections in a sec. Let's talk colleges.
Yeah.
Because they are back in the news. I mean, this is the story that's like the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, I guess it's our legacy as a podcast. I'm just joking. It's not.
Conestoga versus Sioux College. John Tibbetts versus David Orazietti.
Yeah, it's back in the headlines. Just to remind everybody, last year, right?
It was, yeah.
David Orazietti, the Sioux College president.
Back in February.
Came on our show to talk about the federal government's decision to cut back on the number of international students, and he talked about what the impact that was going to have, and we talked about the bad actors in the sector, and David was honest. To his credit, I think he was honest to say, we know who the bad actors are, and we pressed him and said, well, who are the bad actors? And he specifically pointed at Conestoga College.
He absolutely did.
He said everyone in the sector knows that these are the quote unquote bad actors. These are his words, not ours.
Yes.
And it ignited a war of words that has ended up in court. So the Conestoga College president made some comments about him, basically said, talk about a whore, look what this guy does, right? Which was reported not only by us, but by news organizations across the country. David Orazietti and Sioux College have filed a lawsuit against Conestoga and Mr. Tibbetts, Dr. Tibbetts.
Yep.
And Conestoga replied with a statement of defense recently saying that they were not being malicious, they were being accurate. And so it's just cycling back into the news. It'd be really interesting to see how this pans out. Can you imagine a meeting of college presidents when they get together? Like, what's that? Like, some on one side of the room, some on the other side?
Fly on the wall. That's what you want to be.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the next? So they've filed their statement of defense, 15 pages worth, to get the $200K defamation suit kicked. So what happens now? These things take forever?
They could take forever. They could. There are some timelines they have to, but they're still a long ways down the road. There may be a trial date set. I doubt it would get to that.
Yeah.
I would think that these two guys would figure out a way to make a statement and put it out there and get this move past this.
Yeah.
But it's the gamesmanship now, right? You have a lawsuit. They're refusing to back down. I believe, if I read it right, Tibbetts was recently given an extension on his contract, so he's going to be at Conestoga for a while.
Right, yeah.
Oraziett's running Sioux College. And they're under a lot of pressure. The real issue, of course, was international students and the cutting back.
Of course.
And so that, it's you see it now, too. The college universities are cutting programs, cutting staff. The implications of that are starting to weigh on them. So you can imagine 2-3 years ago, they were feeling really great. They were growing. They were bringing in more revenue. Their campuses were growing. There was talks of expansions. And now all of a sudden that's all ground to a halt. And in the background, you have this kind of thing going on as well.
Yeah. Just read this week that Centennial College in Scarborough announcing that 50 of their programs are affected as a result, a byproduct of the international students being reduced. And
I'm not opining on which is whether it was right or wrong to do that. I mean, there's pros and cons to why they did that, but it's definitely having an impact, and I think it's only going to get worse.
Okay, speaking of worse, maybe better, who knows? The talk around town is that Premier Doug Ford is set to pull the trigger, so to speak.
A lot of rumors, a lot of reports, including our team, the Trillium, who've been reporting on this. It could be as early as next week, so by the time we come back, there might be a snap election called. We're definitely prepping hard for it. We're ready for it. Selfishly, this is our first provincial election with a crack team of political reporters in place here at Village, right? We've launched the Trillium 2 years ago. You know them well. You talk to them all the time for your show, Trillium Talk. And they just do amazing work. They're one of my must-read sites in the morning when I get up and see what's going on. Their newsletter, their emails are fantastic. Just bring you up to speed on all the stuff going on in the world of politics. And I can tell you, Scott, there's lots of great conversations happening about how we're going to cover this election. We're going to monster it. We're going to cover it all kinds of different ways, great ways, coverage that our local communities are really going to appreciate, I think.
Love it. Can't wait to see it. I have a question for you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe you can give a little context for me. Ford keeps saying he needs a mandate from the people of Ontario to tackle the potential tariffs that President Trump is threatening. How much bigger of a majority can you get than what he got the last election? What's the advantage from his perspective?
Well, I mean, I think if you listen to people who know this stuff better than I do, that he doesn't need a new mandate, right?
Right.
He has a strong mandate. He has a majority. That there's a lot of other things at play here, right? There's the Greenbelt investigation that still has to come out. That's one major thing. There's a lot of talk about whether he would want to be running in an election with Pierre Poilievre as the prime minister, who we assume is, polls are showing he's going to win the next federal election, because traditionally in Ontario you kind of have the opposite. If there's a Conservative at Parliament Hill, there's a Liberal at Queen's Park. So I think all that plays into it. I mean, look, the next election is not supposed to be for another year and a half.
Yeah.
I think the people of Ontario gave him a pretty strong mandate to do what he has to do. But in the end, Scott, it doesn't matter. This is the way that our system works. You can call a snap election if you feel like. It's going to cost a lot of money.
Yep.
And I find it interesting that the opposition politicians, you hear them saying, well, this is a huge waste of money. We're not going to do it. But we're ready. Let's go. so they're ready to rock too. So they'll be just fine jumping into that election. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, you always assume sometimes when these things happen that the governing party is going to get punished for when that election was called. I remember when Trudeau called an election in the middle of COVID.
Right.
People thought, come on, nobody wants this election. And people are going to punish you. Well, they didn't. He got back. It was another minority, but he won the election and he was back in there. So I don't know, by 2 weeks into the 4-week campaign, if people are going to care that there was an early election. I think that'll be old news.
Sure.
And what's great about election campaigns is, the parties have their platforms ready to go and they have their messages they want to get, but there's always things that go off the rails that take over as the story of the day. And that's really where I'm really looking forward to having our team in place, following the leaders around the province. It'll be the first time we've had that kind of coverage here at Village, where we have people embedded with the leadership campaigns going around the province, to really be on the news of the day and to be asking the questions that our readers want to know.
Yeah. I remember last election we did whatever we could to get the leaders of the parties on the program, two of which we had Andrea Horvath at the time, who led the NDP, and Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party, who somehow managed to get a green-walled hotel room when he called in.
Those are the two things that stick out to me. And Andrea was in the back of her campaign bus. I had some maroon velvet seats.
It was wild, man.
It was great. But you have reached out, or you're going to reach out to everybody. We're going to the same thing. The floor is open if you want to come on. And,
always.
And join us on the show. Hopefully we'll have some of them come on, if not all.
All right. We'll see what happens in the next week to 10 days with that. Okay, to today's program, the Canadian Medical Association recently using the services of Abacus Data to do a survey. And some of the statistics quite alarming in terms of people getting resources, medical advice from the internet because they have no access to a doctor or any kind of healthcare services, and the numbers are alarming.
Yeah, and it seems to be the more people are having to deal with the fact they don't have a primary care provider, the more they're turning to the internet for advice. And there's all kinds of, although there's some legitimate things you can find online from the right organization, there's all kinds of garbage out there.
What?
And I know, believe it or not, I know you don't surf the internet. You don't use that thing.
No.
You're not a TikToker.
I am not a TikToker.
So it's a fascinating study, and just the opportunity to have the president of the Canadian Medical Association to talk about some other things as well is a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Dr. Joss Reimer, the president of the CMA, joins us next when Inside the Village returns right after this. For the most comprehensive coverage of Ontario politics anywhere, it's another installment of Trillium Talk across the Village Media Network.
Essentially, this would amount to around $11 million in, lost money.
The ministry's unofficial estimate of the number of people experiencing homelessness in the province is almost 250,000 people.
The province knows that the CASs are in deficit. They will probably find out that this is one of the reasons why.
Amidst the speculation of an early provincial election that the Ford government is worried about.
Trillium Talk every Sunday morning at 8 across the Village Media Network. Welcome back to Inside the Village across the Village Media Network and available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Scott Sexsmith with, as always, our editor-in-chief, Michael Friscolani. On the line with us today on the program is Dr. Joss Reimer, the president of the Canadian Medical Association. Doctor, great to have you on the show. Thanks for your time today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, let's start. You guys recently commissioned Abacus Data to do a survey. I want to start with why did you do the survey, and more importantly, what did you learn from it?
Well, we're seeing misinformation flourishing online, and that is causing problems for Canadians who are struggling to get the information that they need. They're struggling with access to healthcare and at the same time being forced with misinformation. But the reason we did the survey is because we need to measure this. We need to have a way to know if things are getting better or worse. Are the things that we're doing working or not working? So it's critical that we get the information from surveys like this to help inform our policy decisions and our advocacy.
And we'll talk about some of those numbers in a couple of minutes. I read a quote from the Globe and Mail. You were quoted, and I just want to read it back to you. You said, "We're seeing both a crisis of access to care along with the crisis of misinformation." So it almost makes for kind of a perfect storm. Can you just kind of build on that comment that you made and what you meant by it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really think of any other generation that's had this double whammy where both they're being bombarded with misinformation that's being forced at them through algorithms on social media, whether they're looking for it or not, and also having this lack of access to care where we have 6.5 million Canadians who don't have access to a family doctor. And so, of course, if you can't have a doctor that you can have that trusted relationship with and ask your health questions to, you're going to go online. That's a natural thing for people to do. So we worry about what do they find when they're online? Do they know how to find good sources of information? And what do they do when they see information that may or may not be true? How do they evaluate that and help make good decisions for their health?
Does the CMA have good advice on that, doctor? That's a great question because we've all had health issues in our life that we go through, and you do search. You're talking to your doctor, your nurse practitioner, but you are also looking online. You're looking at what you think are reputable sources. I think as a journalist, I can tell what a reputable source is and what isn't, but I think a lot of people just don't have that knowledge. Is that part of the education that goes along with this?
And it is really hard, and we don't really expect that Canadians are going to have the background to be able to determine everything they see online and whether it's true or not. So we have produced some material about how to recognize misinformation. What are the red flags? So we want people to take a step back when they see health advice, especially on social media, and think about, what's the source of this information? Who is the person that's telling me this? Do they have the credentials to back it up? Do they have education in this area? What are they telling me? Why are they telling me this information? Are they selling me something? So if someone's telling you, don't take your diabetes medication, instead buy my supplement, that's the kind of thing that we're saying is a red flag. Not to say that their information is necessarily bad, but certainly when there's that other incentive reason that they're sharing information with you, then we want people to take a step back and then go to something like Diabetes Canada to see, does this information hold up with the experts? Because that someone like Diabetes Canada, they're not selling you anything. They're really there because they have your best interest at heart.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, who's pushing this misinformation? Why is there so much of it?
Well, the big challenge is really that the social media platforms are the ones pushing it. The algorithms force that information on us whether we want to see it or not, and they profit off of that information coming at us. And we know that misinformation spreads far faster than true information online. We know on Facebook, for example, that misinformation gets 6 times more engagement than factual news. And so those are the types of things that are really challenging because the algorithms are designed to push that at us. And the more of it you see, the harder it can become to find truth and to understand when you're seeing factual information. So we do worry about the content creators who are trying to push this stuff and sell you your diet plans and your supplements and your anti-vax information. But even more than that, we worry about the algorithms because that's really who controls what we're being faced with and what's really manipulating us in our social media spaces.
And let's talk about that for a sec, Doctor, if we can, just looking at some of the numbers and the question, the trust in news and social media. Facebook and Twitter, or X as it goes by now, towards the bottom. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg just announcing in the last week or so that now Facebook is just getting out of the fact-checking business. So it's going to be even more of a cesspool.
Yeah, that was something that was disappointing for everyone working in this space. We know that misinformation is doing very well out there. And so the small checks and balances that exist and seeing those disappear is something really discouraging because we're seeing these harms. The survey showed us that 23% of Canadians have experienced a harm because they followed advice they saw online. And that's just the 23% who either recognized it or were willing to admit that they had that harm. So this is happening. And even in my own practice, I was recently doing a shift at a women's hospital, and there was a patient there who had a really bad bleed after having a baby. And postpartum hemorrhage is what it's called. That's the number one cause of maternal death in the world. So this is a really serious condition, and she needed a transfusion to replace that blood. But she declined the transfusion because she didn't want to receive vaccinated blood. So because of misinformation, this was someone who's trying to make the best decision for herself, for her family, for her new baby. And because of this misinformation, it became a life or death situation for her. And every physician has stories like this. We want to be there to provide good information to people, but when they're being overwhelmed online by misinformation, it can be so challenging for people to navigate through.
That's a heartbreaking story just to hear. That
it really is, and I wish it wasn't a true story.
Yeah, I believe it 100%. I guess there's political figures in the world who are pushing that misinformation too, right? We live in a world where people like Dr. Fauci in the United States are seen as someone that we shouldn't be believing. And it points to even the fact the data that you guys have found here, even the fact that, to me, it's surprising that only 80% of people trust their physicians. But that means 20% of people don't. Does that seem off to you? I mean, you'd think it'd be 99% of people would trust their doctors.
I don't think that we can find 99% of people who trust any one group. So we were really encouraged to see that physicians were still the most trusted health professionals out there. And we've even seen there's a global trustworthy index, and physicians are still globally the most trusted profession worldwide. So there's a lot to be said for that important trusted relationship, especially when you can have it over a long period of time and you get to know them and they have your health knowledge and your best interest at heart. So it's really important that we work, while we're talking about this information, we also need to be working on the healthcare system, because access to care is a big part of this whole problem. And when you don't have that trusted relationship, that's probably where some of those 20% of people fit in, is that they don't even have a relationship with a physician. So how do you have a trusted relationship when you can't access them at all?
That's a great point. We're going to get into that for sure. I just want to go back to that story again that you just told. How is a doctor, or any doctor, how do they approach that situation? Do you actually try to sit a patient down when they come up with something like that, where I don't want vaccinated blood from a transfusion? How do you even begin to have a conversation? What do you try to tell a patient in that situation?
Those are really difficult situations because you know that this person is trying to make good health decisions. Nobody's trying to hurt themselves. Nobody's trying to make some decision that's going to harm their family. And that's where it's really important to start, that we have a mutual interest in this person's health outcome. We're both trying to have a good outcome for this individual. And that's where we always try to say, we right now disagree on how we get there, but I am here because I care about your health outcomes. And so a lot of times what we find in those conversations is you don't necessarily convince somebody that day, but the trusted relationship and the fact that they come back is where you can build that over time. Now, in that moment, it was life or death. It was right at that moment. You have to have that conversation right then. But even more important is having somebody who could have been having those conversations over the years leading up to the birth of that baby, so that when she was there, when she was having her baby, and having that conversation with someone she trusts, you're more likely to be able to help somebody navigate through a difficult situation. We've actually studied it and found that when it comes to relationships with patients and having them follow the health advice they get from their doctor, that empathy is more important than expertise. Of course you need expertise. There's no question. But if someone doesn't think that you care about them, if someone doesn't feel like you're listening to them, if you make them feel stupid, they are not going to listen to what you have to say, because that's going to cause them to be very defensive right away. That's a natural tendency, if someone makes you feel stupid, to push back. So we're trying really hard to train our future doctors about the importance of these conversations, of meeting people where they're at, and just trying to help guide them through.
That's an excellent point, because we've all been on that other side where we're speaking to our doctor about an issue, and that is so critical that you actually feel like they empathize with you and you can trust them, which speaks to the main finding of the research, right, doctors, that 1/3 of Canadians are turning to the internet for health information due to that lack of access to a primary care provider, which is the big question, right? So you're the Canadian Medical Association. What do we do today to try to turn that corner to actually get more doctors, more nurse practitioners?
Yeah, I think that was the most sobering stat in the whole survey for me, was that 37% of people say they have no choice but to go online because they can't access a doctor. So we're working with the federal government and provincial and territorial governments to do two big things. There's lots of things we're working on, but the two I want to talk about are team-based primary care and reducing administrative burden. So team-based primary care, we don't have enough family doctors. The number of family doctors we have per capita is lower than most European countries. It's not meeting the needs of Canadians. And so we want to do something in the short term while we're trying to build up more family doctors. But they have 10 years of university education, so we can't quickly churn out more family doctors. So in the meantime, and ongoing, we want to have team-based care where you have a pharmacist, the nurse practitioner, a social worker, a physiotherapist, all working together, sharing a space, sharing a health record, and caring for people together. Because we know that when we use our different expertise and our different training together, that we can provide better service to patients, and we can provide service to more people than that family doctor could do alone. And I did that in my own practice. I had, a clinic where we had the social worker, occupational therapist, counselor, dietitian. And when I had someone come in with their pregnancy-related diabetes, they'd go see the pharmacist who would teach them how to use the glucometer and check their blood sugar, and then see the dietitian who would spend way more time with them than I could, talking about diabetes-friendly, low-cost diets. And that's what we want to build up, and we need to have funding, though, for that, because right now, most family doctors pay for everything that happens in that clinic. They have to hire the staff, they pay the utilities, they pay the rent, and they can't afford to hire very many people before they run out of money. So we need to work with the governments to find new funding models to bring the nurse practitioner into the clinic with the family doctor. Mm-hmm. And then on the administrative burden, our family doctors are spending 10 to 19 hours a week on paperwork. That's so much time. Think of how many more people we could see if we could reduce that. Mm-hmm. So we want to do things like decrease the number of forms that we have to fill out, make the forms more similar across different insurance companies, decrease the portion that the doctor fills out, and get rid of sick notes. Because sick notes seem to be bad for just about everyone. Like when you have a headache or a cold, nobody wants to go see their doctor. You just need to stay home and get better. Yeah. And, us seeing you just so you can get that paperwork filled out for a human resource issue is not a good use of our time. And in fact, we do it 12 million times a year in Canada. Wow. So it is not a minor issue.
But that's people like Scott abusing the system, doctor. That's people like Scott abuse the system. He's always calling in sick. So
it's not true.
We have to make him go and get that. It's a great point. Actually, just to speak, listen to what you're saying. It's fascinating. We live in Sault Ste. Marie where the Group Health Center is. I'm sure you may have seen this in the news. It's been covered heavily. Have you heard of the Group Health Center and the issues they've been facing here at all?
No, tell me more about that.
Okay, so the Group Health Center...
Get them mixed up with some other ones.
Yeah, sorry. So the Group Health Center is a team-based... It's been, it's kind of seen as the model for Canada years ago on how to do healthcare. The same way you described, where there's doctors, nurse practitioners, the pharmacists, there's specialists all within there. And they've struggled. They've had to de-roster thousands of patients. And I don't know if that's particularly, and maybe you can't speak to this, but if that's particularly because the model doesn't work or because it needs to be refreshed, but like you said, you have not heard of that, so maybe we won't talk about that.
Well, I can't speak to that clinic specifically, but we know that we have a health human resource crisis across the country. And so this is one solution amongst many. And we're not going to be able to magically produce more nurses. But what we need to do is collaborate and make sure that we're using all of our expertise in a way that's the most efficient, bringing that together onto the same team. But is it going to be a quick fix and be the panacea? No, but we need to be working on that and the administrative burden and remuneration and the international graduates and increasing our class sizes. There's so many things that we're trying to do all at the same time.
We talk about the 37% of people turning to the internet for information. A number that really stood out to me, and I'm sure it did to you as well, Doctor, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. 42% of respondents tried medical advice that they had found online. To me, that is mind-blowing and really shows how desperate people are.
Yeah, almost half of us are following advice we see online. And some of the respondents, I don't remember the exact number right now, but I think it was somewhere around 30% have followed online advice that disagreed with their own doctor. So the misinformation is powerful, and those algorithms are powerful. They're really good at dealing with human psychology, and they're good at getting you hooked and getting you in there and capturing your attention. And so this is going to take a lot of effort from us. And that's why the Canadian Medical Association values a healthy media ecosystem. So we're actually funding health journalism in Canada because we need to have that traditional media still present as a base where there's referenced and well-researched information happening. But we also need to be in those spaces where Canadians are. So we have a platform, a channel, Healthcare for Real, that's on Instagram and YouTube and Threads, where we're sharing information about the Canadian health system because it's complex and hard to understand. And we want to be part of that solution. And we have a network for physicians who are on social media spreading good information. And we're trying to support them, give them the tools that they need to be part of that solution.
What gives you hope, Doctor, when you see reports? This is kind of depressing when you kind of see these numbers, right? You talked about those things, the positive things you're doing, but what gives you hope? Because sometimes I wonder, the age of misinformation is so great and so large, and it seems to be growing, and I wonder in 5 or 10 years where we're going to be. Do you feel like you can turn the corner on this and that this will not continue to get worse, say 10 years from now?
Yeah, I don't know if hope's the word I would use right now, because honestly, I feel more worried about this than I've ever felt in the past. But what I do feel is driven. And I know that there's a lot of other healthcare professionals who also feel really driven by this. And so I am so encouraged when I see the passion in the Canadian health professionals who want to be part of these solutions. There is so much effort and care and empathy and passion in that group that are out there and trying to reach out to Canadians. And so we know that this group is going to keep fighting this battle because we care. We went into our healthcare fields because we want to help people. We want Canadians to be healthy. And so I know that this group is going to keep pushing on social media, in traditional media, and then in those one-on-one interactions with our patients.
And that is a great note to end on. Dr. Joss Reimer, the president of the Canadian Medical Association, joining us today on ITV. Doctor, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate the time as well. Thank you.
Last year, financial stress had me at my wit's end. I felt trapped and embarrassed that it had gotten so bad. I really felt I had nowhere to turn. That's when I called Ontario-wide Financial. Their home equity lending was a game changer for me. Despite my bad credit and being in a consumer proposal, they helped me get the cash I needed. Thanks to Ontario-wide Financial, I've started this year with hope, not stress. They gave me a fresh start, and they can do the same for you. Ontario-wide Financial, because everyone deserves a second chance.
Back to wrap on Inside the Village. One thing that Dr. Reimer was talking about, and social media obviously plays a huge role in the misinformation, but part of the survey was, who do you trust in news and social media the most? Guess who ranked number one?
Yep, Canadian news organizations. 58% of people
you got
said
that
they
right.
trust them the most. Yeah, it's encouraging. It means that 42, is that the math right? 42% don't. But it is, and again, I sound like a broken record all the time, but that's our role, right? We try to tell you to the best of our ability to get the facts as they are, talk to people who know best, who understand what's happening, and get that information across. And we do the same. I think about the way that the media covered COVID, and it was all with the best of intentions to try to say this is happening, this pandemic. Remember the early days of COVID? The pandemic was declared.
Yeah.
And you're just reaching for information, and the people that were giving you the information were the medical officers of health and those type of people who are, you're supposed to trusted individuals,
yeah.
right? So it does make you feel good in the sense that, more Canadians than not think that we're trustworthy, and because we take that very seriously.
Do you remember when COVID first happened and it was like, 2 weeks and it'll be gone?
I remember I had a relative, I won't name the relative, who posted this stupid thing on Facebook. He'd done his own calculations. Well, if we all isolate for the next 2 weeks, it'll take another 2.5 weeks. And he's like, so we should be done by May something.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you know what a pandemic is? Have you ever done do you know anything about history? And I remember, this is a true story. I'm not going to lie to you.
All right, don't lie.
Remember, it happened in March. And so they sent the kids home for March break.
Yes.
And they said, we're gonna add another week to March break.
Right.
I went to go pick up my son in his elementary school, and I remember saying to the teachers, I'll see you next year. They're like, what are you talking about? I go, they've declared a pandemic. We're not coming back to school. Oh, you're so funny, Mike. And I saw that teacher years later, and she said, I remember you telling me that at the bus stop, that I'll see you next year.
2 weeks, it'll be done.
2 weeks.
We went from that to being told if we drank some Javex, we'd be fine.
Yeah. What's ivermectin? Is that the...
And now that gentleman is yet again running the biggest superpower in the world.
Right on. Let's go, Javex.
Oh, okay.
Did you stock up?
That's right. Stock up. Just to be safe. ITV at villagemedia.ca. By the way, do not. We can't stress this enough. Do not drink Javex. It will not cure anything. I mean, it will make your whites white again, but that's about it. ITV at villagemedia.ca. Any thoughts, comments, or suggestions on this episode or any others, we'd love to hear from you. Derek Turner, executive producer of the program. Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for your time again this week. We truly appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Inside the Village.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.